Hello, everyone, and welcome to another inspiring session in the Watermark Masterclass series, our very first for 2026. So welcome. I'm Donna Burr, a partner in our interim executive search practice here at Watermark. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and I'm especially delighted to be joined by Michele Lemmens, founder of the Longevity Productivity Lab, and we are in for a thought-provoking discussion, and I'll formally introduce Michele shortly. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which I'm hosting today's session, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. Over the past 5 years, we've had the privilege of hosting a diverse range of masterclasses featuring exceptional guest speakers. Each has generously shared practical insights that continue to enrich our community of leaders. If you've missed any of the past sessions, you can catch up via the recordings available on our website. A little bit of housekeeping. Today's session will run for 60 minutes. Please feel free to submit questions at any time via the chat. Just ensure your settings are set to visible to all panelists and all participants so everyone can join the conversation. We'll weave the questions as we can throughout the discussion, and we're aiming for some additional sort of Q&A time at the end for about 10 minutes. As always, this session is being recorded and will be available on the website. And following today's webinar, Michele welcomes you to connect with her on LinkedIn. How does today's conversation matter? Well, the longevity has become increasingly survey over the past 3 years. Most recent survey, 33% of you reported working beyond the traditional retirement age of 60, a figure that has doubled since we first conducted the survey 15 years ago. A quarter of leaders also told us that they treat their mental and physical well-being as essential assets, prioritising work-life balance to sustain a fulfilling and meaningful career. Longevity consistently elicits some of the strongest responses in our survey. And from this feedback, we've identified the top 5 organisational shifts that you've identified needed to support longer thriving careers. And they are flexible work models, lifelong learning ecosystems, health and wellbeing strategies, bias-free talent practices, and purpose and culture alignment. These insights strongly reinforce today's topic and connect directly with Michele's research and message. Our discussion builds on the themes and findings from a submission Michele authored for the Productivity Commission, grounded in extensive research and a series of expert roundtable conversations. We'll share the full report after today's conversation so you can immerse yourself in this rich data and explore those insights in more depth. So introducing today's guest, I'm thrilled to introduce Michele, a seasoned senior executive with more than 25 years consulting experience, partnering with C-suite leaders across both mature and emerging markets to drive business outcomes globally. A skilled business architect known for her ability to clarify complex business models and shape value propositions, often in the context of new market entry, M&A, or joint ventures. A pragmatic champion of positive change and an advocate for sustainability, innovation, startups, and diversity. Michele also contributes beyond her executive career through advisory roles and co-chairing initiatives across business, foundations, accelerators, and academic institutions. Together, we'll explore her latest venture, the Longevity Productivity Lab, and unpack the paradox in rising life expectancy and declining workforce participation from the age of 45. Michele, welcome. I'm excited to be in conversation with you today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Donna, and also to Watermark. And it's great to have this platform to share my work on Australia's mature workforce crisis. And yes, I am using that word. It's great to be here also with so many leaders interested in exploring the frontier of how we might transform workspan as individuals, as corporate executives, and as ecosystem players. As I started, I wanted to quickly share the bridge that got me to the intersection of longevity and productivity, or workspan. This is my focus, increasing mature worker participation for the 45 to 65-year-olds. A couple of years back, I went to an economist impact breakfast, and it asked us to picture ourselves living to 120. Yes, 120. Just think about that for a moment and what that might entail. That lens prompted me to think about things differently. Not a life wrapping up at my mid-80s, but also almost an exponential jump that opened up a lot of questions, but also possibilities. Now, it's likely that I won't live to 120, but with medical interventions and innovation, what if we did? So after the event, lots of systemic impact started to unpack itself for me, and I met with hundreds of people from CEOs, CXOs, NEDs, academics, ministers, not-for-profits, to try and understand their perspectives, what pressure points they saw, and the rationale for them being interested or motivated by this topic. And nearly all of them saw longevity as important, but that hadn't translated to action, hadn't translated to what living much longer might mean for them, for their companies, and for their country. And so 6 months ago, I decided to champion rethinking the role and the value of mature workers from being perceived as an economic burden to an opportunity. And that was through reimagining work spans for individuals, businesses, and governments. And I went all in. I submitted, as you said, to the Economic Reform Roundtable, and then submitted a more detailed paper to the Productivity 5 Pillars Inquiry, drawing on the expertise of many to submit a robust paper that outlines why we need to give workspan attention. Where might we start? And the aim was to build momentum for change. So I'm looking forward to sharing and hearing from all of you. So let's jump in, Donna.
We thank you, Michele, for all that you are doing in this space. Everybody on the call, I think, would echo that. So to kick us off, you talk about this concept of the longevity economy paradox. What is it, and why does it matter for business leaders right now?
Great. Let's go to those slides, I think. Sorry, no, we're let me start that one all again. At its simplest, we are living longer. We're living longer, both that, and we're living healthier longer. So increased lifespan, increased health span for many of us. Many want to contribute longer, often professionally, and then often with increased purpose. So there's a wealth of capable minds and bodies to be leveraged. And as the IMF shared last year, today's 70-year-old is the 53-year-old of the 2000s. We're not producing enough children to replace our population, and these low fertility rates, along with an aging population, is changing the median age of our workforce. And interestingly enough, in 2020, a quarter of our over 55-year-old workforce had degrees, and that number is continuing to increase. Despite that, a survey last year by the Australian Human Rights Commission and the Australian Human Rights Institute showed 56% of employers were reluctant to employ individuals over 50. Workers are retiring on average 9 years earlier than they planned. So that's a disconnect between the intent and the actual, and unfortunately, it's not usually by choice. Gen Xers will be the first generation of Australians that are expected to routinely live into their 80s and early 90s. And so with another 20 to 30 years of modern medicine ahead of us, it's expected that 25% of those may live to well over 95, with, as they say, a meaningful minority crossing 100. So that's maybe 25 to 30 years of healthy life in retirement. Let me repeat that, 25 to 30 years of healthy life in retirement, roughly the same as we've all been gainfully employed. How is that going to work? So logically, life workspans have to extend for fiscal reasons, but also for engagement, purpose, and mental health reasons. And so the paradox, Australia has a skills shortage. We also need greater productivity. But at the same time, we've got mature workers, those are those over 45, according to DEWR, who want to work longer, need to work longer, but are finding it harder and harder to access that work. Donna, you asked me why this is urgent for business leaders now. A couple of really quick, punchy things. One, corporates consistently identify skills shortages as a business issue. Their customer dollar is rapidly turning silver. Their workforce planning assumptions are likely outdated. The liability, or the possibility of liability, is looming as the gaps in policy continue to be tolerated. Updated longevity white space is leaving innovation and business growth on the table. And one more thing, this is personal for all of us. Living better, longer lives require us to reframe workspan, rethink workspan, and act.
Michele, we might jump into a poll. You've created, you've established the paradox for us. Ali, can we get you to pop up a poll with a quick question for everybody just to get them engaged? How confident are you that your organisation is prepared for Australia's demographic and longevity shifts? We'll just give everybody sort of 30 seconds to respond to that and post the results. Michele has sort of painted a great context there for us around why this is an issue, why we need to be thinking about this now. So how confident are you that your organisation is prepared for Australia's demographic and longevity shifts? Great, Ali, thank you. So there we go. Probably, Michele, curious on your thoughts there. Maybe not too many surprises there. 63% saying not confident, not very confident, or not confident at all. 14% on the fence, and just a small percentage somewhat hopeful. The optimists in our group. So if I could kind of sort of segue from this to what does the evidence that you've looked at tell us about Australia's mature age participation challenge, and what are some of those economic consequences of inaction? You started to touch on that. Can we dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, certainly. And look, with over 80% sitting on the fence or not confident at all, I think that shows that we've definitely got work to do. And we are at risk of squandering Australia's grey gold. So let me jump into the data. Look, I've established lifespan, increased lifespan, and hopefully the logic around workspan. The paper that Donna mentioned has all the numbers behind the points that I'm about to make. So if you're a detail person, I'd recommend you have a read of that later today or over the next couple of days. I wanted to focus on the thematics here. So our government support system was designed for an average lifespan of 70 to 75, not 90. Care, pensions, health were all designed for a time when life expectancy after retirement was far, far shorter. And as a planet, there are few countries who will be able to afford the support that they provide today in another 20 years. It's just not sustainable. The crisis that we're seeing in Australia is that as our population ages, our workforce participation of those over 45 is not keeping pace. Our participation is peaking in our early to mid 40s, and then it starts to drop. There's a wealth of lived experience, or grey gold, as I called it earlier, to be tapped into that we're wasting, and we're not seeing the same outcome from our global peers. You're, of course, aware Australia's productivity has seen little change in the last 20 years, and the push with the Economic Reform Roundtable, the 5-pillar inquiry, focused on a resilient economy, adaptable skill sets, care, green transition, tech digital enablement, and these recommendations should certainly help. But we believe there's also a huge opportunity to also try something new and tackle the wasted capacity of our 45-year-old plus workforce. This is something new. Increased mature worker participation has real economic value. One of the most common challenges documented by Australian businesses is the shortage of skills. I don't think I need to say much more on this, except to add that the Jobs and Skills Australia report that came out late last year highlighted the challenges being faced by older employees and older workers for the first time. And of course, there's a double whammy. We're not only missing out on the GDP and taxes from those 45 to 65 who aren't working or are well underemployed, but we're also, through our inaction, pretty much guaranteeing more costs in later years. So that's coming through increased requirements for healthcare, housing, pensions. These are preventable costs if we address the mature worker participation issue. And so financially, the old system just isn't fit for purpose in the future. And there's lots of reasons to take a more serious look at addressing the problems and finding solutions. But we don't have the robust data on the size of the prize and the value of tapping into this bucket of grey gold. The last robust numbers were done in 2012 by Deloitte Access Economics, commissioned by the Age Discrimination Commissioner, Susan Ryan.
Wow, that's a long time. That's a long time in data lagging. Michele, we've just lost you off screen there. There we go. Thank you. So despite this growing awareness and this deepening evidence base, albeit, some data still needs to be updated, there are several entrenched barriers that still continue to limit Australia moving forward. So what is it that's actually holding us back here?
Look, we've never been here before.
Mm.
Today, we've got 2/3 of the people who've ever lived to over 65 alive in the world today.
That is astounding.
It's astounding, isn't it? We simply just don't have the lived experience and frameworks to navigate this new world. It's not like it's inflation or trade wars or any other business situation which we've got the muscle memory to adapt to. We've got legacy mindsets when it comes to longevity, and we need new maps. We don't understand the upside of addressing the problem. So that's the numbers and the value. So the potential to prioritize action if we can't attach a value is usually pretty limited when it comes to business and driving systemic change. Being the good thing or the right thing to do for society is not going to be enough. Another thing, solving for mature workforce participation requires consistent, sustainable changes in policies, behaviours, and mindsets. And it's going to take time. This is not a short game. It's a multi-stakeholder challenge where everybody has a role to play. And this stretches across government. It doesn't fit neatly in a department who's responsible for solving it. It goes across many departments. And so the challenge is we need intent and leadership. And today, this doesn't really sit clearly anywhere with anybody having accountability to solve it. The closest we can get is Treasury and Productivity Commission, and they're yet to pick it up. Ageism is also a problem in hiring and retaining. And we're seeing also that was written on the back of the pack that the promise of a longer golden life maybe has some fine print that we need to look at. The 3-stage life of school, work, retire, and a 25 to 30-year working life is last century. Retirement, as we've been promised, is still a modern invention that no longer fits the world in which we live today in the same way. And the premise of a career is also changing. As we know, the single employer, traditional linear paths for life are dead. And the situation that we face today has kind of some similarities to the boiling frog, right? So even though we all intuitively understand there's an issue, we all are consciously or subconsciously hoping it won't affect me and that someone else will take care of the wicked problem.
I think there'll be many on the call that relate to what you're saying here. Many who have taken self-agency of themselves to choose to work a different way, going into the future to kind of understand very much that there is no job for life anymore. There may be some sitting on the call who are at this transition point, so this will be timely information. So we've painted a picture, maybe bleak, but there are options, there are opportunities, there are solutions, and there are some across the world, companies and countries that are doing some things to take charge of this. We might jump into the next poll, Ali, before we segue into sort of solutions and who's actually doing this well. So poll question number 2. To what extent does the organisation you're actively working in now embrace age-related inclusion across the employee life cycle? So keen to get a barometer of the current experience of everybody on the call. Let's give you a few seconds to respond to that.
Thanks, Donna. I think these are really good, lead indicators of where the organisation's at in relation to tackling age-related inclusion. And so it'll be really interesting to see how these turn out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when 90% of organisations do not have age addressed in their policies. And so if you think about a DEI coverage, we have inclusion from almost everything except age.
Yeah, that's interesting. It feels like it should be an easier one to step into, but clearly there's not. Ali, what are the results telling us? Okay, interesting. Let's have a look here. Good split across the various. So it seems like, okay, so the access to training, upskilling, career development seems 1 in 2 feel that their employee is doing that. And then really kind of a third split across using data.
Yeah.
Policies that explicitly talk to dimensions of diversity around age. Okay, and then supporting workers in job design. That's interesting, more perhaps than I expected, to be honest, a third across those pillars, and then still quite low there in job ads, language and bias. Yes, we hear quite a bit of that. And this concept of the hiring manager really understanding or avoiding, I guess, age-related bias in interviews and interview processes. I think that's one that many we hear in our network, and obviously sitting on the recruitment side, executive recruitment side, they experience day to day. So, Michele, let's segue. We've discussed the imperative and some of the challenges. How do we as corporates leaders now play a role in the system change required, and what needs to happen to build a more productive and inclusive, resilient future workforce in which over 45s, and that someone sitting in the 50s bucket, 45 seems quite young, but in which the over 45s can choose to participate? Stop the screen share.
How much time do I have?
Yeah.
Look, there's so much here that I'm going to leave out, but let me capture a couple of them. So we outlined 8 actions in the paper. They're not definitive, they're not all encompassing, but they are a starter for 10 for stakeholders to take a look at. And those prioritised levers would definitely help us to unlock some mature workforce participation. They were developed in conjunction with experts from the field and highlight the depth of knowledge and the wealth of knowledge that's available and the experience that can be tapped into immediately to drive change. It's not like we need to do a 3-year study because we're starting from scratch. So I'd already mentioned quantifying the upside of addressing mature workers as a value driver for the economy and the need for the whole of government to change, so I'm not going to dwell on those further. But I will just tack on the need to get some granularity in the level of mandatory reporting around the over 45s, rather than being treated as one homogenous group that all have the same needs. Organisations need to take a look at their policies and process and do an audit using a longevity lens to identify and address and remove biases. So we highlighted some of the most relevant areas in the poll you just talked around: hiring, training, accessibility, employee CSATs. The need to deeper dive into attrition data would also be useful to understand why 45s are leaving and if there's design issues that could help increase retention. So we also need to recognise the myths that are surrounding mature workers and amplify what they have to bring to the table, which is context and judgment, 2 of the key skills that are needed to drive AI value. So there's also experience and institutional knowledge, some of which is being said that is leaving a gap in organisational competitiveness. Reliability and lower absenteeism. They're often more mobile with less ties. And some of the team-based research and innovation sees stronger performance and innovative outcomes. And there's a really good article by Annie Coleman in Stanford's Centre on Longevity last month that highlights this topic. I wanted to move to talk about job redesign and to rethink job design. So we've spent a lot of time attracting graduates, and our focus then designing for new parents. But what about the different needs of a 45 to 65-year-old cohort? Flexibility is certainly one of the more common needs that are shared and not addressed overly well today, especially in the age of the modern day carer. This pressure is really well outlined by Abby Bloom in her latest book, The Cost of Not Caring. And then I wanted to switch very quickly to another one, which is our HR systems, right? They've been developed to support traditional linear career paths that have an alignment to age and the proxy that brings with experience and skills. So a 20-year-old today starting work will expect to work for another possibly 50 years.
Wow. I won't tell my daughter that.
The implications of this new multi-stage model for life that was outlined by Linda Grattan, where learning, working, caring, break, change, repeat are recurring across a lifetime before we even get near semi-retirement. And this new model has really strong implications for our human capital management and the workforce architecture. And a one-size-fits-all won't help. We need to decouple careers, jobs, and skills from age. This is a really critical shift. And as the roles and changes happen as individuals, we really need to take a look at our legacy mindsets, not just corporates. We've become quite fixated around hierarchy, compensation, reskilling, learning. And we're at the stage where relying on a corporate, not that any of us do, I'm sure, on a call in terms of our own progress, was there maybe in the past, but this plan needs to sit with us if we're actually going to be working for 50 years. They're there to help and can facilitate, but to embrace this changing nature of value and uncertainty, there are only so many jobs at the top. And if we peel back the layers, older workers can sometimes get too expensive for the value that they add. Now, that's another whole topic in itself. And there are so many more solid actions that we can take around addressing ageism, enabling multiple careers within a lifetime, and intergenerational workforce design that I wanted to touch on. But let me hand back to you.
Yeah, and I guess the exciting thing about this shift is that we get to craft our own careers. And the scariest thing about this shift is that we get to craft our own careers and we don't have somebody kind of guiding that, which is what happened in the past. Quite interesting. So building on what you've said, future of work strategy and planning discussions are very much dominated by AI, and there seems to be a clear bias around the positioning of mature workers as we explore AI. And I can see there's been a few comments on the chat with regards to that. Seeing things differently, how should the leaders be thinking about transformation and job design themselves?
Look, indeed, our conversations remain very dominated by AI. If I take a segue for a second, talk about the future of work, WEF 2030 Future Skills highlights the growing need for soft skills. And so while AI is changing the shape of work, we need these soft skills to ensure adoption and adaptation within the organization. And we propose that the mature worker brings deep experience, contextual judgment, and these soft skills that can help complement AI's analytical power. AI-led transformation is driving us to question where skills reside, what jobs look like, what the architecture for the organization might be. And we suggest that we need to add a longevity lens to these changes. What mix of workers, job designs might be needed to build momentum and success? And there are many studies evolving from our global thought leaders in the effective workforce management redesign that needs to occur here. It's a big topic all by itself, so I think I'm going to stop there.
I feel like we could save that one for another day as well, but no, you make some pertinent points there, and I think a lot of what you've just said then also echoes what we found in our most recent survey about the skills valued in the cohort that we work with, which are typically people over the age of 45, in sitting along AI, so that judgment, critical thinking, and using AI in our terms as an amplifier to support what they do.
Yeah.
So there is a way forward, and I'd like to move to what you're seeing across Australia and internationally about how organisations are responding to mature age participation. Are there countries or companies demonstrating, what great models of what great can look like, and what can we learn from this?
Thanks for this. I think there's some good things I want to highlight, and I can start here at home. Chobani, you guys will know, you might know them, the yogurt makers, amongst many other things, here in Australia are working to reimagine the life cycle of work for mature workers. And they're seeing real results. And this was outlined last year by ABC Radio in a program hosted by Lisa Leong. And so if you're interested in what they're doing, take a listen into that. It's all online. Retailers like David Jones see the benefit of employing older workers for the flexibility, the reliability, less inventory shrinkage. And Natalie Termine, the CEO of Jobs and Skills Australia for tourism and many other sectors, says their members actually have some preference for older workers because of their patience and calmness, so well suited in terms of alignment. Bunnings we all know as examples, so I won't go into that. But what I did want to highlight is a British DIY, B&Q, which has a very similar profile to Bunnings, who've experimented quite fully with this model. And so they worked into predominantly staffing stores almost entirely by older workers. And they benchmarked the results. And they found higher profits, lower staff turnover, less absenteeism, and a more positive perception of customer service. So some really good outcomes in that particular sector were coming through. If I switched countries versus companies and look at the results of workforce participation in this 45 to 65-year-old group. OECD does some really good listings of who's placed where. New Zealand has a 10% better mature worker participation than we do. Really? What are they doing differently, and why is Australia not beating them? Some of the reasons cited are around cultural awareness and acceptance of working longer, both the need to, but also the access that should be there. Platforms seem to be maybe more available that position older workers to access that work. There also seems to be a hangover from COVID, where there is a greater acceptance to continue remote work and remote workers as part of that. Also, they've got some plans. So they have an older worker employment action plan that they're executing. And then, while not directly related to the 45 to 65-year-olds, the later pension-related years, workers are not penalised. So I won't use the cliff mentality, but so let me back that one up. But when you go into retirement, you're not penalised through capital gains, or it's not capital gains, through means testing, or high tax rates. The tax rates continue on. And so there's not this perception that I need to stop work because I'm being constrained in those later years. Singapore is also a really great example, not very far away. And even though they've got a much smaller base than us, they invest a lot more successfully in training their employees and in balancing the equity. They recognised a couple of things the same as we did. One, productivity issue, and two, the need that this will become a societal problem, given and with greater inequity if they don't address the older worker participation. And so they formed a tripartite with the Small and Medium Business Association, and with the unions, and with their equivalent of our DWR and Jobs and Skills, which is Workforce Singapore, to put in place 100 pilots in 2026. Let me just do that again. 100 pilots this year with mature executive workers to say, how do we extend the participation in the workforce? So what's working? What doesn't work? I've spoken to the Deputy CEO, and I've spoken to 3 organisations who are helping extend workers, looking at job design, helping with the sourcing of the appropriate skills for workers, and also helping with the mentoring of that transition into a different stage of life. And so there's really exciting things, I think, there. While these are not workforce participation, I also wanted to highlight organisations like CVS, who've internalised the importance of the consumer or the customer and their changing base, and are therefore redesigning some of their business models. So CVS in the US, pharmacy-based organisation, really took a longevity lens to say, if I look at most of my customers who come into store, what are they struggling with? And they found that a whole bunch of their design, from the entry point through to the length of aisles, through to the organizations of products for selection, actually really made it difficult. And so they've done a huge amount of redesign successfully. And then, some of you may have seen recently, L'Oreal has absolutely really stepped into this. If you look at their customer base and their consumer base and the spend, so those over 50 are accountable or responsible for 50% of consumer spend. And that culminates actually in a double whammy as well, because those over 50 are often making decisions for their parents or their in-laws as well. So I know those are kind of not worker participation ones, but I just wanted to chuck them in.
Well, I think also that lens of organisations, if they're not thinking about it consciously from the employee perspective, often it starts with the consumer. So, consumer employee experience often is one and the same. So get the consumer piece right, we'll probably inevitably get the employee piece right. So you've talked about some of the big changes and of what's required, what other countries and organisations are doing. And these changes really, if I bring that now back to Australia and kind of this burning platform, require all of us to step up and lead. What would be your recommendation sitting here today and talking to this audience that we need to do differently to positively impact Australia's work span trajectory? So let's just bring it back to now. What's the next step we take here in Australia?
Yeah, look, thanks for that. And I think that is really the key thing. There is a lot of research which is fantastic. So everyone from Griffith to Curtin to Queensland to New South Wales, CPAR people might be aware of, and the research institutes that were funded through that. We have a large body of research, and much of that has been focused on some of the illnesses that we have in latter years, but some of it is absolutely focusing on work, the changing future of work and what that might look like, with many experts in that field. But if I look at the need to address work span and the change, it's pretty urgent. And the inaction is, I think I've outlined, costing the Australian economy. It's locking corporates into a human capital blind spot. And the negativity is impacting the mental health of Australians. So I mentioned earlier as well, while this isn't a litigious thing here, it's on the road to becoming if we look at the UK. So over those last couple of slides, I've shared several areas that are really important, but I wanted to touch on stakeholders. So this is a multi-stakeholder problem if we're going to move the needle. And so what's one action in each of those stakeholder groups that we can take? Government, we need to lead with intent at a federal level and with sustainable intent. The 45 to 65-year-old are an active voter contingent. And one of my discussions with somebody who's been in politicians and as a political leader recently said the amount of uncertainty that we have at the moment, and certainly some of the pivoting that's happening, is a real opportunity for them to pick this up and look at it. It's important to this voter base and it's important to the country. So this doesn't need to be a multi-year or 3-year program that eventually we do roundtables and studies and we eventually get something now. No, this can be a time-bound, cross-sector, multidiscipline task force that we can put in place, and that's what my paper actually highlights. Let me shift to CEOs. For those of you who are on the call or aspiring to be a CEO, I'm really going to encourage you to say, what does longevity mean for my business? Taking a lens for that, not just for your associates and your employees and those people who deliver value to your customers, but also to your customer base, to your brand, your product design, your experience design. How might you think about those things differently and apply some of your marketing spend? So whether you look at COTA and their recent report, or actually the stats that say how much of marketing spend gets attributed to this cohort, it's less than 10%, far less than 10%, and most of them feel their needs are not being met. Also for CEOs, there's the risk, there's the future of work, as we said, and innovation. So those to me are really key questions of why you should look at longevity from a business resilience and growth perspective. CHROs, I know you're under the pump today and there's so much to be done and there's never enough time, but the implications of an aging workforce is really important. Hopefully you can see as our population changes and the medium age changes, some of the structures and the architectures that we use to manage our people and develop future leaders needs to evolve. Boards, usually a good discussion. Somebody said to me the other day, this is not on the radar for NEDs. Well, I'm hoping for those of you who are either on boards or aspiring to be, you can see some of the connects for your boards. And really that question is really simple. How do the plans that you have in front of you address today's megatrend, which is aging demographics? Not-for-profits like the Age Discrimination Commission, like COTA, need to drive the narrative shift. We've done this before, whether it be Girls Can Do Everything or more women on boards or more access and inclusiveness of different abilities. We need to do this now. And then the last one is really around each of us on the call. Living to 120 or even 90 requires us to be much more actively engaged in rethinking work, careers, our skills, and what do I do with the extra years I've been gifted? And so my question in each of those contexts is what's your plan? I'd like to just before we go to Q&A, I'd like to ask your help. So to everybody on this call is, hopefully you're as convinced as I am, and Donna is, of the need to address this. But I'd really love to get your help on what do you see as the major levers or opportunities that we can use to motivate this discussion in your corporates. And so if we can pop up that poll, that's great. I can see that that's up there. So I'm looking for the key levers. So what is it that you think will trigger the conversation and get it started? So while I would love the whole of company or the whole of system to get engaged, we also need to understand that sometimes we need to start with a particular area rather than just focusing on a few things on the whole system. So it would be great to see people's perspectives.
And we welcome you doing this. Clearly, Michelle's 2 feet into this problem and really championing for change. So some insights here can kind of help steer where some of her discussion is taken forward with the stakeholders and levels of government that she's meeting with about this. I'll just all put you on notice too. We are moving to Q&A. I have seen a robust conversation play out on the chat. So thank you, and people commenting and responding. If you have some specific questions now as we move to Q&A, please just pop those in the chat and I will do my best to monitor that and bring those to Michele so we can do some Q&A sort of for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Ali, how are our responses looking there?
Okay.
Interesting.
That's really helpful. I think the interesting one is the skills, which is what I've had highlighted by everyone from AICD to Business New South Wales to ... is the key reason why we think we might get some traction. So I think that's really interesting, and also the retention of institutional knowledge and mentoring capabilities. So those are both coming up really strong, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have a look there. Really, really helpful. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take us off the share screen. Welcome you to pop some of those questions in the chat to guide Michele and I. If there's anything specific you would like to know, anything that Michele has discussed that you'd like to do a follow-up question, please let me know. Michele, just kind of the thematics that I've seen, a lot in there around policies and a lot in also around the infrastructure. I saw superannuation reform needing to support the changes, and you touched on this. What are some of the comments here? Okay, so Michele, in your discussion with all your stakeholders, government included, what pain point resonates with them that you think might be the trigger to get action? Is there any kind of key theme or thought there? Thanks, Jacinta.
Look, I think if I think about the corporates, the one thing that seems to be more of a motivator is the skills shortage, which is what just came through in that last poll. The customer is surprisingly not as strong a motivator, which does cause me to question a lot in terms of who do we have designing products and services and experiences and needs for the population of which we're faced with today. So I think that the pain point is absolutely skills. I think the pain point for government is they don't know where to start. And it's so segregated across different departments. So if you look at the amount of change that's required, so for example, say I want to do a multi-stage career, a multi-career across my life stages, right? I've been a doctor or a nurse, a nurse rather, or a construction worker. Clearly, I can't work for 50 years in doing that type of work. It's too difficult. And so what we're needing to see is pathways that actually help us understand how to segue through that and create new career paths and leverage the skills that we actually have. And so that's a pretty difficult thing to do. So I think that's certainly one of them. And also we're tolerating ageism. We're tolerating it in our policies, we're tolerating it in our society. And so that urgency is not coming through because we're just going, oh, well, it's kind of part of things. We've moved. People are living much longer. The 50-year-old of today or the 70-year-old of today is more like the 50-year-old of yesterday. And so our mindsets are quite blocked and need really a trigger out to start to address some of these new pieces. Yeah.
And it probably is a little bit of, that impacts future self. And it's sometimes very difficult in the current environment to imagine what that's going to be like.
Yeah. It's really uncomfortable, right?
Yep.
It's really uncomfortable. And so the thing that's probably surprised me the most out of all of these discussions, and look, don't think I wasn't the one who had it all sorted out, because I certainly didn't.
Yep.
But I was surprised that we spend, majority of the people on this call have spent their lives deciding on what's most important future strategy for those organizations, how they will grow, how they will counter risk and change, how they will address some of the pressing problems to keep that organization resilient and growing. And yet, this doesn't seem to feature either for the organization or for themselves. So when that question that I posed, if you're going to live for another 25 to 30 years in a healthy life, what are you going to do? Now, some people will say to me, I'm going to be on a board and I'm going to play golf. Congratulations. Let me help you out. There's only so many board positions out there, and golf's pretty expensive. And you might find you want to do other things. And so when I ask people that question, it's surprising the amount who haven't got to that next step of unpacking what it might mean.
Yeah, it's and we all need to take agency of that. A question here that I think is interesting. So government clearly a key stakeholder and driver of policy that can help shape and get things moving for us. One of, not the only. There's a question here from Nicole Glazenbook. And question to you, if you have some insight on this, how does the government workforce itself look? Are we seeing the public sector engage with older workforce and enabling the step down government itself, is as a huge employer?
And I think there's certain sectors in Australia that have a stronger domination of older workers. I mentioned retail and tourism, agriculture, but also government. And so government do have a stronger representation of older workers. Are they champing at the bit and putting in place policies and revolutionising their own workforces? Not that I can see. Is there a real opportunity in my discussions with New South Wales, the Department for Women and Ageing and Workplace Health and Safety? I've tried to push some of those discussions, and also Productivity Commissioner here. It's just not an easy move. It's really not an easy move, but there is real requirement for them to, because I think there's a real knowledge loss about the country there as well.
Absolutely. Scanning through, thank you for your questions. I'm doing my best here. A question from Martin. Where do we think the skills shortage actually is, occupation or particular field? We talk a lot about it, but I know, what has he got here? I know of a large number of people in their 50s, this is interesting, who can't get employment because they are too skilled. So the feedback comes back, they're too skilled or deemed too old or too expensive. But I must admit, on this side of the executive recruitment fence, I do hear from a number of our networks saying that when they sort of front up, while there is a willingness, and it's often for them not about pay, it's about meaningful, purposeful work, the pushback is, why would you want this? You're too experienced, you're overqualified for this role. Any comment on that?
And so I'll go to the people who are saying that they've, that they're overskilled. And I think there's a couple of things in there. It takes, I mentioned before, we were quite hooked to this idea of hierarchy, position, the skills. And, again, myself, I've been through that career path, and still I have a large amount of that as well. Individuals take quite a long time to get to the point of saying, I actually want to work. It may not be at the same level that I was at before, but these are the skills that I have and I can do the job. It takes too long, I think, for individuals to repackage that themselves. But if I go to the decoupling, and that's what I mentioned before, we need to decouple jobs and age and experience.
Yes.
And so at the moment we've got the two. Really, this job can be done by a 35-year-old. That's great. Why can't it be done by a 45-year-old if they choose the pay and the package that goes with that? And this is a real block that we need to get rid of. We need to decouple these things and corporate policies. It's a really simple thing. And part of the discomfort, and I'll touch on this because I didn't get a chance to talk about this earlier, part of the discomfort is not just the unpacking of it. It's actually around some of the challenges of intergenerational workforces. So, as we know today, we've got a real opportunity, let me put it a different way, of having so many different generations in the workforce. And the challenge facing mature workers also faces our younger workers. And in some cases, they actually find getting a job are harder than the older generation. And so while we've had a discussion about the mature worker, I think for an organization, those need to come together and say, how do we look at the needs of an intergenerational workforce and make it effective? Part of the problem is our managers are really inexperienced at effectively managing an older workforce. We're not comfortable, and therefore that bias creeps in. The model is, I'm older, I have a younger workforce, not I'm in a mid-level and I've got a mix of younger and older workforces. And that discomfort and lack of training is, I think, holding us back.
Yeah, look, thank you. It is a complex environment within organisations today, just say becoming more litigious, but with 5 sort of very kind of different generations, different needs. Complex ecosystem for companies to navigate. A number of questions sort of coming through, and one person sort of summarising, in your words, and then before we kind of move to any sort of parting thoughts on yours, but if you were to advise the people on the call about the one thing that they can do at a personal level to prepare themselves for this kind of, what we're fronting into now, what would be that one thing that you would suggest they start getting onto today, the action they can take personally?
I would think about, what does this mean for you? So forget the company, forget the government. Those are all things which really your ability to impact have a greater or lesser, extent, especially when it comes to government systems, unfortunately. But I would really encourage you, most people put up this consideration off till they're in their mid to late 50s. I'm kind of getting near what I thought I was going to retire, and now what am I going to do? And actually with today's uncertainty, with AI, with different ways of thinking about work, we need to think about our value. And we really need to, each of us, have a huge amount of experience and value that we can add to an organization. But we really need to separate that from the position and from necessarily the package that we've got. So I would really encourage individuals to go, what does this mean? What do I love doing? Actually, you know what? I've actually always wanted to be a florist. Hell, I can become a florist at 50, if I want to. I don't need as much money, maybe. I can move to a different place. So life choices start to unpack themselves. And I think designing your own life for that increased work span is something that we all can take responsibility to do. And then there are, there's been a plethora of coaches that have evolved over the last 10 years. And believe you me, there are a bunch of transition coaches evolving as well. I don't think you need, most of the people on this call don't need a transition coach, but they might need help unpacking what does the future look like in terms of work, in terms of transitioning into a different set of experiences where you can contribute your purpose and your capabilities.
I love that. I feel that's a very high note to sort of finish this on. I always like to kind of go, what's the action that we can take personally? So thank you, Michele. Before we sort of close up, Michele, and thank you to everybody on the call. So many great questions, great conversation. Michele and I will be looking at the transcripts and looking at the questions you've asked and themes that were of issue, and continuing the conversation over the next couple of weeks on LinkedIn with some posts. So really encourage you to help share to your network, kind of help raise the visibility and the complexity of what we're talking about today. But Michele, in moving to wrap up, is there a final message or call to action that you'd like for our audience who have dialed in today?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'd encourage us to identify the insight that resonated. So find something, there will be something, because many of you have stayed on the call for the whole time. What resonated, and then do something with it. Speak to your partner, a colleague, your boss, your team, somebody, and bring the conversation that we've had today, or the conversation that I would have loved to have had if we'd been in a room, to life. So add some value to the session. Start to think about what it means for you, but your business as well. And I'd love to hear more about your plans. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Michele, for such a rich and insightful conversation. Your work on the Longevity Productivity Lab, that's still a tricky one to get out, It brings clarity to an issue that's not only topical, but very personal, I know, for many on the call today, and leaders and the organisations that we're speaking to from Watermark. Thank you to everybody who's joined us, for your thoughtful questions, for the conversation, and sharing your own reflections and experience in a constructive and thoughtful way. Thank you. My hope, as Michelle's is that you leave today with one or two practical ideas that you can take back into your own organisation or own career. What is that insight topic that you're passionate about? How do we reframe how you think about ladder career and talent, re-examine policies and practices, or starting a different conversation with your peers, with your board, with your CEO about what this means in your organisation? So to wrap up, the webinar available after today's session on our website. We will share the paper that Michele has penned and authored to the Productivity Commission, so you can deep dive into the rich insights and data that are in there, which is the backbone of today's session. And please connect with Michele on LinkedIn, support her messaging and her articles. Please share that out to your network. Some really insightful, thoughtful, data-driven information that really impacts all of us. So on behalf of Watermark, Michele, thank you again. Really appreciate your time in having this conversation. To everyone on the call, take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to welcoming you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.